So I last left off with asking the question, if you were an engineering major, wouldn't MIT be the perfect school for you to go to? And this was, of course, in relationship to Colby Covington being kicked out of Iowa State, because Iowa State was obviously the first choice because it's a number one wrestling school in the entire country. And now that he got kicked out, he just had to cope with the idea of not being there anymore by saying something to the effect of, well, I have my family in Oregon. All my loved ones are there. But the question still remains, why did you leave in the first place? Which, again, is kind of fair to ask. Why did you decide to come into this fight knowing that you were not prepared? In other words, why did you decide to take the title shot after winning just off of Jorge Masvidal, who isn't even in a title picture anymore, and think that you were somehow worthy or even ready to take on this challenge, unless, of course, you are just coping with the idea that you are no longer in that particular level of championship prowess. Then you brought in the president, you brought in all these people from around the world to come see you fight, and this was the result of it. And once again, after the fight, he decides to cope with basically riding Trump's tail in ways that he's saying, yeah, I want to thank the troops. I want to thank the first responders. All these vanilla statements that just really mean absolutely nothing. And what do I mean by that? You ever heard people go up to an armed forces member, whether they were formerly active or non active, and say, hey, thank you for your service? Now, I understand the sentiments that people say when they say these things. But again, I think this is just one of those statements where we are just programmed to say it because it's the nice thing to say, maybe a bit of an icebreaker, which is exactly what you saw right after the fight. It was an absolute icebreaker. He knew that he was embarrassed. He knew that he wasn't able to implement his game plan. And therefore, he has to save face by basically saying that, well, this is what's going to happen. Now, Trump is going to become the president again. He's going to make America great. Then you bring out all these political jargons that somehow have nothing to do with the fight. And this is a result of it. So, once again, coping is one aspect that you have to have if you're fighting at such a high competitive level to where sometimes you will lose. And when you go out and you take the risks that you do in life, such as what he did earlier in his life when he was in Iowa State, being in such a prestigious school, well, he took on chances of potentially getting kicked out, knowing that it was a very strict school. And now that he failed at his opportunity, he decides to go and cope with the idea that he is no longer in Iowa State and in the present time, potentially no longer viable for being a contender or a number one spot in terms of getting a title shot ever again. It's three times now. So he has to cope with it in some kind of way. And what does he do? Just like with getting kicked out of Iowa and then having to move back to Oregon, he goes on and makes a new plan in his life. And rightfully so. What does he do? He goes out and calls out Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Now, is it smart for Colby Covington to do that, to call out Stephen Wonderboy Thompson? I think that it is, for the simple fact that it's right up his alley. It's a great style for him to match up with, more than a winnable fight for Colby Covington. And we will see Colby Covington in the way that we've always known him to be in that fight with Thompson, if that fight ever comes to fruition. Now, why do I say that? Well, I'm going to tell you why. People are saying that this isn't the Colby that they had originally seen in the RDA fight, in the Robbie Lawler fight, in the Tyron Woodley fight. Of course it's not. Why would it be? Why is it the same Colby Covington when you know well that Colby Covington is fighting a different guy with a different style. And by the way, a very negative style. And I need you to understand what I mean by that. What I mean by negative is that Leon Edwards has the potential to fight the matchup in a way that is conducive to the pace that he wants. Now, it's not so much of the fact that he has cardio issues that he has to fight at that type of pace, but it's literally the type of pace that allows him to carry as much energy as he needs in the last minute for him to pull off a head kick knockout in the way that he did against Kamaru Usman. Now, with Colby Covington, he is not able to implement the same type of fighting styles and game plan that he normally would against an RDA or a Robbie Lawler, because once again, Leon Edwards' style is very negative to where it can stop you at a certain range. In other words, in order for you to shoot a takedown, you have to be in close proximity to execute this movement. Also, have you ever seen an amateur wrestling match? Where is it that they start? It literally starts in a towing the line type of scenario. You ever seen BKFC? Where do they start at? In the middle of the ring where they tow the line. Where do you start off in wrestling? In the same place. Now, of course, once the bell has whistled and it's the first period of the match, you can literally go anywhere within the circle and circumference of that mat. You can fight at a distance if you choose to. It'll just make the shots a lot harder, which is the point that Leon Edwards did in this matchup. It's not a wrestling match. It's an MMA match where they literally start you from one black line to the other of the cage. And sometimes you have to go out and chase the person. So it lends itself to the strikers, in which to be a successful grappler in MMA, you have to be able to close the distance in a very extremely athletic way, in a very explosive way. Now, we've seen in the Tony Ferguson fight the commonalities in terms of what people say of, well, Tony Ferguson used to rely a lot on his athletic prowess, being able to be acrobatic, being able to do backflips in the middle of a fight, being able to do all these weird motions in order to confuse the opponent, but also give them performance paralysis based on the fact that they're not able to keep up with the overload of the constant movement that, let's say, somebody like Tony Ferguson is doing, or in early Colby Covington's career, exactly what he was doing, pushing that elite level of pace. Because if that is what you rely upon when you are younger, athleticism, by the time that you get older, you're not going to have a longevity type of career in the way that Bernard Hopkins did in his mid 40s, all the way to his 50s, relying on technical prowess in order to get through a lot of these younger and more athletic guys. And this is what we saw out of Colby Covington versus Leon Edwards. We saw a guy that was not able to close the distance. We saw a guy that was just not fast enough, was not long enough, and quite frankly, not even strong enough for Leon Edwards, because we also have to remember the other factor that Colby Covington came from a weight class that, well, I mean, he didn't really come from any weight class, really, right? He didn't move down from 185 the way that, let's say, Jared Cannonier came up from heavyweight all the way down. Even Dan Hooker, he fought all the way up to that same weight class, all the way down to 155. He didn't do any of that. He could easily go down to 155, become very competitive among all the other sea of sharks that are in that weight division, even though he likes to downplay it and say that it's the little man division or it's a no good division, or saying that 170 is more of the real man's division. But make no mistake, 155 is one of the hardest divisions in the world. And he can easily go down there, but he chooses not to. I'm not saying or implying that he's a coward in any way, that he wants to avoid the likes of Armin Sarukian or Islam. Not at all. What I'm simply saying is that Colby Covington is the complete opposite of a coward, because he doesn't decide to cut weight. He literally weighs in at 183. He's barely a natural middleweight, so he can't even make middleweight if you really want to put it in those perspective. He's 183 walking around and only loses 13 pounds in order to get down to 170, which isn't really that hard. You have 2 days of suffering as a result of that, and that's it. So he's not a coward. But at the same time, that size doesn't lend itself to the bigger athletic guys with the likes of Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards, for that matter. Right now, he's elite enough to take on the other 170 guys, but Colby Covington doesn't have the size to where he can match his elite prowess. And that's one thing that I think people really need to understand in order to really get a gauge of this fight and where Colby Covington is at in his career. Now, was it the worst performance that he's ever done? Well, that remains to be debatable. I don't like to talk in ways that are not factual or anything like that, but the statistic speaks for itself. The volume that Colby Covington put up in most of his fights was not present in his fights. And I urge you to go do your own homework. Take a look at the statistics of the count measures of his volume in comparison to the volume and the lack of that he did in UFC 296. So again, is that a sign of decline in any kind of way? We never know. But we also have to give respect to Leon Edwards and what he is able to bring to the table. Because that right there is the reason why Colby Covington did not look like the way that he did. So that right there is the technical aspect of this particular fight. Let's look at the psychology of Colby Covington, because that's where I was getting at in part one. In part one, I had mentioned to you that Colby Covington was a kid who was picked on. And this is something very important for you to understand because it does something to you. Everybody has now this anti-bullying campaign, and it's great because simply a lot of people don't understand the impact that it falls upon you growing up. It can turn people into absolute psychos. It can turn some people into sociopath killers. It can turn people into full-blown criminals to where they will never come back into the realm of reality after they have damaged their brains and, let's say, their psyche through certain traumatic experiences. There are certain points of no return in that aspect. So somewhere in Colby Covington's life, he became this person that was made fun of because of his teeth or because he was poor or because he lived in a trailer park or whatever sort of problems that Colby Covington can come up with or any stories that he can tell you truthfully that has happened to his life. Let's take it for face value as what it is and take his word for it. It is traumatic when somebody is telling you that you are no good because you have bad teeth or because you come from a certain place. It does something to your mind. It does drive you, which is the reason why he became such a beast of a wrestler. And then when all of that happened, this is the one aspect that people don't understand. You can easily become either a good guy or a super villain. And that's the point that I was getting at from part one of this particular video. Right? I urge you to take a look at part one. It is on the description below. Not right now, but later on, so that you can understand in full context where I'm getting at as I made this particular part two right now live as we are speaking. So it is important to understand you will become either one of those two things, a good guy or a bad guy. Unfortunately, it has turned Colby Covington into one of the most evil men in mixed martial arts. Almost like a Joker type of scenario. You guys seen Joker. He was an innocent man, was just trying to get through his life. And all these unfortunate mishaps have turned him into this demon of a man full of anger, vitriol, and just absolute vindication that he wants to inflict on the world. a Thanos type of character, as I had described in part one. So this is who Colby Covington has become. In comparison to Leon Edwards, this guy can also easily become an evil man just based on his experience. He can easily turn it around and say, you know what? I'm very bitter about what happened with my dad. I'm very bitter about the situation that I had gone through growing up poor in Birmingham, UK, and then coming from Jamaica, being an immigrant into this country and not getting along with everybody, not assimilating correctly, not getting the right proper treatment, or sometimes even the right proper help. But again, one can argue England is a socialist state. They provide for their citizens in ways that you probably won't in other capitalistic driven societies, such as here in America. You're just never going to get the type of social help as a poor person that you do in America than you would, let's say, if you were in England. Yes, we do have welfare systems here, but not to the extent that they have in the UK. And this is the type of scenario that Leon Edwards was living under, on top of the fact that his dad was murdered and all these other things that come along with it. It can really damage your mind, and it can really turn you into a horrible human being. It can turn you into one of these sociopathic killers that you see roaming around in Chicago, all the gang worlds of LA, New York, Miami, all these tough cities that are in the United States that have all these types of killers. Leon Edwards could have easily become that guy, but you look at him, he took the more positive route. He decided to say to himself, you know what? I'm going to rise above this negativity. And I think there's something remarkable and something admirable that we can really learn from that in Leon Edwards. And this is why it's a breath of fresh air when we have champions like him. On that day, when he was challenged by Colby Covington in a press conference, as he was told that his dad is in hell based on a press conference banter, George St. Pierre contacted Leon Edwards that night. Now, you want to talk about another guy who came up being bullied. And again, like I said in part one, this is really a stereotypical story with a lot of mixed martial artists, boxers, prize fighters, people who decided to learn to fight because they just didn't want to take any more abuse from anybody anymore. George St. Pierre was that same guy. He could have easily become a monster, and he has the capability of doing so. Both GSP, Leon Edwards, all these guys, these are some of the toughest humans in the world and one of the greatest athletes in the world. Yes, they have the full onslaught capability of being these men, being the most horrible and most vicious people that you've ever seen. They have the capabilities of doing that, but why do they choose not to? And that's what I'm very fascinated by. Because if I can really insert myself into it, in all honesty, I would have a different response. I'll just say it like that. For example, now that we're in the theme of analyzing the minds of these great 170-pound fighters, let's look at George St. Pierre's psychology, right? Because he is the guy that got into Leon Edwards' ear in terms of taking it cool and taking a much more stoic approach. And so this is important to sort of highlight GSP's character. One day he was driving around in the streets of Montreal. He runs across somebody that looked very familiar to him begging on the streets. He saw that man and he realized this guy was a guy that used to bully him back in the day. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? You are George St. Pierre, the greatest fighter that the planet has ever witnessed, and probably statistically speaking, the greatest fighter in the UFC in terms of being able to beat every guy that he's been in there with, being able to win all the titles that he's wished to win, and on top of the records that he's put up with win streaks and title defenses. This is George St. Pierre. And not only that, in his heyday, and even till now, he was an absolute commercial powerhouse with the way that he had sponsorships. He was marketable. He had the great look about him in order to, let's say, attract people into mixed martial arts. This is George St. Pierre, right? And here's this guy that used to pick on him who's now living in the street. How does GSP respond? He goes and he gives the guy money, but he also gives him advice. He says, "Hey, man, listen, you are a very strong guy. You are very capable. I don't know why you are in the street, but I'm going to help you anyway. So here is money. But don't be bad guy. But remember, you treated me very bad, but this is me now. Da, 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 da." And I'm sorry if that GSP impression was any good or any bad. Rate my GSP impression right in the comments below and let me know what you think one way or the other. But I will say this, right? With George St. Pierre, he treated that man with absolute respect when he could have easily just drove past by him with puddles of, let's say, dirty water from the streets of Montreal splashing on him as George St. Pierre is driving by, hydroplaning right in the same lane as he's standing, begging people for money. Right? He could have easily done it, but no. George St. Pierre saw that this man was somebody that was in some of the hardest position of his current life in the current moment of time that he saw him, and realized another thing. He realized that this man had bullied him based on the fact that maybe this kid was being beat up at home by his dad, being abused. Maybe they had a bad family dynamic that caused him to act up in a way that made him take it out on somebody that was weaker than him at the time. So George St. Pierre was very cognizant of this reality, not vengeful, not vindictive. And even in Leon Edwards' case, he took the high road. When easily Leon Edwards could play the role of the top boy Jamaican British gangster, which, by the way, would make him very marketable. I remember Jesse on Fire when he was reacting at the press conference to him throwing that bottle at Colby Covington. He said, "Man, we got to see this more often from Leon Edwards. He would probably make a lot more money in pay-per-views," and rightfully so. But guess what? Leon Edwards is not that type of guy. He's okay with not making the Conor McGregor money, but still being the champion. I mean, he still makes great money. Make no mistake about it. But it's not George St. Pierre money. Even George St. Pierre money, it's not Conor McGregor money. And even Conor McGregor money, it's not Floyd Mayweather money. And it goes on and on and on. And to be quite honest with you, if you notice, a lot of these guys that are pay-per-view selling fighters that love the trash talk, they don't really have the most peaceful life that you can ask for. Let's just be honest about it. Sean Strickland, for whatever reason, somehow attracts all this negativity around him where people come to his house. He gets into random street fights with people in LA. Conor McGregor, the same thing. I mean, it's even more amplified. He gets into it with people at the bars. He gets into it with people at nightclubs. He puts himself in certain peculiar situations where he has to be exposed, like what happened in the Miami Heat game. The list goes on and on and on. But guess what? Because of these compelling stories and because of all these insane antics that these guys do, including Colby Covington, they make a lot of money in pay-per-views, but reap the consequences of it outside of the cage. Which, again, brings us to why Colby Covington was, how do I say this, rusty going into this fight. Well, he had that fight with Jorge Masvidal, right? What would happen afterwards? Well, Jorge Masvidal caught up with him at a steakhouse, assaulted him, and on top of that, called the cops, tried to sue Jorge Masvidal, only for the UFC to step in and say, "Hey, you know what? If you don't sue Jorge Masvidal," because at the time they were going to put Jorge Masvidal at an 8-fight contract. In other words, they were going to have him for a longer period of time, even before that Gilbert Burns fight that he last did. And the UFC at the time wanted to protect their assets. So let's talk about how this championship fight even happened outside of the competitive architecture of integrity, the integrity of meritocracy in the UFC, which obviously was shown none based on the fact that they just wanted to save one of their assets, which was Jorge Masvidal. And even if Jorge Masvidal just decided to hang it up, which he did, he still has a deal with the UFC on Fight Pass to have all his game bred fights going on with their network. So there was still a partnership with Gamebred Jorge Masvidal that went beyond just his fighting career, also extended into his career in promotions. So they decided to protect their assets by rewarding Colby Covington with a title shot. But again, the type of life that he leads, it's not a very peaceful life. Look what happened. He gets hit, assaulted by his former opponent, former training partner, Jorge Masvidal, gets put out of commission because he's playing all these little games in the process. And this is something you have to understand what Colby Covington was doing. He told the cops and the judge and anybody that needed to listen in order to document these legal matters at hand that, oh, I have a headache, I have a concussion, or this and that. So therefore, he can't go out and take fights, which delayed his career. Do you guys understand that? Let me repeat that for you. Because Jorge Masvidal was being sued by Colby Covington had to play all this role of, oh, poor me, I have a headache, I have injuries, I have a concussion. So therefore, I have to sue Jorge Masvidal, which means if you have a concussion, then you can't fight. And it hindered him. It made him worse. When you're not getting in there active, it's not helping your case because there's going to be top prospects coming up that are going to take your spot and take those places in a random fight night, take those places in the nights of pay-per-views where, let's say, somebody's injured, just like with Kevin Holland. This is the reason why Kevin Holland is a star within the hardcore space of MMA, and if not even just a little bit in the casual space, because he takes the fights, he's always ready, and there's fights that he actually does win. He wins some, he loses some, but he shows up active and remains relevant in the sport. Obviously, that's a different case when you're talking about how, let's say, the comparison of the promotion between Kevin Holland and Colby Covington, but nonetheless, it wasn't helping him to get any better. So he had to constantly play this character, this role, one lie after another, lying after another. No, I can't take a fight because I have to sue Jorge Masvidal. One lie after another. Now you're in this fight. You talked yourself into a championship fight. Now you want to amplify the whole situation. You want to talk about the man's dead father. But again, there's nuances to that because, make no mistake about it, it is very distasteful. But at the same time, it's literally what attracted many of the casual fans to get up and watch that fight, if you really think about it. So that's the reality that we are facing with the psychology between these two men. With Leon Edwards, I got to tell you, it's quite remarkable. But at the same time, I think that out of everybody in the UFC, I got to be honest with you, Leon Edwards has the realest life out of anybody. And what do I mean by that? Look, it's very common that everybody wants to play the gangster. I had mentioned to you earlier, whether it was on this particular part one or part two of this segment of the part two series that I'm doing right now, I told you that Conor McGregor joined the Irish cartel right after he was a double champion and after he even made that money with Floyd Mayweather, and Chris Brown, the singer, joined the Bloods even after he was a pop star. And why on earth would two men of this particular status do such a thing? Well, everybody wants to be dangerous. Leon Edwards, he could easily have lived that life and that persona, which, by the way, would have really marketed him in ways that is way different than what he's being marketed right now. Everybody says Leon Edwards is boring. And anybody that I try to get their fights interested with Leon Edwards, they are just, I mean, they're just like, there's no response. There's not a pulse about it. It's not the same as, hey, are you watching a Conor McGregor fight this weekend? Yeah, bro. Heck yeah. We're on it. How about the Canelo fight? Yeah, I'm excited. And then sometimes it depends on who he's fighting, but most of the times it's pure joy and excitement when he's fighting. How about John Jones? Yeah, great. Usyk versus Fury. Awesome. There's an enthusiasm to this response. How about Leon Edwards? You want to watch Leon Edwards fight? I'll tell you what. When Leon Edwards fought uh, Bilal Muhammad, this was when I had the conference call page on Facebook before they had taken it down. And then I had to concentrate on this particular platform right here, which isn't bad because now I'm getting more views on YouTube than I ever did on Facebook. But that's neither here or there. In other words, anyways, I went and did a preview for the Bilal Muhammad versus Leon Edwards fight. And man, thinking about it, I made some great content there that I wish I had saved up. But nonetheless, I made this one content where I reacted to a video uh, called the Twin Cities, right? Chicago and Birmingham. And I thought, oh, brilliant. That's perfect right there. It was a family from Birmingham, England, switching places with a Chicago family, right? And I thought this was brilliant because guess what? Bilal Muhammad is from Chicago. Leon Edwards is from Birmingham, and I thought this was perfect. So I try to get creative with this, right? I wanted to do something different than what other MMA content creators are doing. So I decided I was going to call up this one underground rapper that I knew in England, right? In Hackney. Um, I asked him, I was like, hey, you want to come on and, talk about MMA on my page? It'll be a great way to sort of promote some of your raps and all that. And he says, yeah, sure. I'm not really into MMA or anything like that, and then who's fighting, bruv? And then I said to him, I was like, yeah, this guy named Leon Edwards and some Arab American from Chicago named Bilal Muhammad. And then he said to me, he's like, yo, man, I have no idea who this Leon Edwards cat is. But you know who I do know in MMA? I was like, who's that, Shine? By the way, his name is Shine City, check Boss Shine City. He's a Hackney rapper from London. So check out his page. He went and shouted me out a few times, so I'd show him some love back. But yeah, he said to me, he's like, but you know what? I don't know who this Leon Edwards guy is, but I do know that Irish fella. What's his name? Conor McGregor. Yeah, everybody knows who that Irish fella is. That's the point that I'm trying to make with you guys, is that there are certain fighters that can really turn up your pulse when you hear their name and you hear that they're going to fight that weekend, as opposed to Leon Edwards. He just never had that. But what if he was a gangster and used all that persona, used his dad's street cred in order to get him as this, I don't know, top Jamaican top boy in Birmingham of some sort, right? He could easily do that. But he decided not to. He decided to take a much more positive route, a much more uh relatable blue collar type of approach to things. And although it's not the most commercially pleasing way to market yourself as a fighter in a world where now people are looking for negativity, and almost to the extent that we're sort of in this attitude era of MMA right? Which is the one thing that truly sells in this sport. Leon Edwards decided, I'm not going to be that guy. I'm just going to be a martial artist. I'm going to do my work. And if it happens to come up that, well, okay, I'm from this part of the UK, I'm from this part of Birmingham, all right, but it's not really an identity that I'm going to use for negativity or to promote myself as such. In fact, you look at Leon Edwards, he's involved in anti knife crime situations. He's involved in situations that literally prevent a lot of kids from getting into gangs. Now, why does he do that? Well, I think for the simple fact that, and again, this goes into why other fighters love to delve into this gangster persona as opposed to Leon Edwards. Because Leon Edwards has actually seen the full extent of what can happen in these violent exchanges in the world of gangs and drug dealing and gun running, etc. He's seen the extreme side of it. Whereas a lot of these guys who want to jump into the whole gangster scene, whether they're rappers or fighters or athletes of any sport, the one thing that they don't understand is the full onslaught violence that this particular world, although lucrative in the world of music and in the world of promoting yourself in the fight game, really dangerous and traumatizing to actually live through it. And this is what's great about Leon Edwards. He's decided to rise above that attitude. But once again, in this world of gangster personas and the attitude eras of MMA and boxing and all of the above, it's marketable. It's marketable to take that route. But when you don't, I'll tell you the beautiful thing about it. The fact that Leon Edwards decides he's not going to take up that type of offer. You're inviting a lot of good people in your life by doing that. By doing the opposite, you're attracting some of the worst elements to come into your life. You look at Mike Tyson and the type of people that came around him, whether that was Don King or anybody else in a rap game that you could think of. Negative, just pure negative. But Leon Edwards, I think the one thing that I can really commemorate Leon Edwards for during this whole entire week was that he was able to live a life of peace. When you're Leon Edwards, you may not be the most famous guy in the room in terms of the mixed martial arts community, but overall, you're going to lead a much more peaceful life. The type of after party that Leon Edwards probably experienced last night after that win with UFC 296 would probably be midgeted by the type of after parties with the likes of, let's say, Conor McGregor would pull off, or maybe even the likes of Ronaldo or all these other top superstars. With Leon Edwards, the type of peace that he can enjoy is knowing that, well, I got my coach here, my crazy coach Dave, who went and tried to curse at Colby Covington even after the fight, showing that he really has pure loyalty to him. But then even Leon Edwards is like, nah, chill, chill. We're not going to be about that. It's very inspiring. It's very inspiring simply because you have to understand the benefits that come with his life. And it's very inspiring because, let's be honest, this game of mixed martial arts, we're sort of encouraged a certain level of negativity, whether you're a fighter, whether you're a media content creator, whether you are a matchmaker, a manager, a coach. If you're involved in this game, there's a lot of negativity that is constantly encouraged your way. And because of that negative encouragement, we sometimes forget the unsung heroes such as Leon Edwards that show a different example. Now, even with Khabib, here's something you got to understand. He's also somebody that can fall into that category, but that goes without saying. I also just think that unlike Leon Edwards, Khabib had these great chain of events that allowed him to become a commercial super powerhouse the way that he has become after the Conor McGregor fight, which again, guess what? Even though he was not initiating that negativity, it was still that same negativity that allowed him to become a bigger name than most of these guys in the sport. It was still negativity that allowed Leon Edwards to now have a bigger name because he went out and fought a very negative fighter in Colby Covington. And not only that, a person that delves into negativity with somebody that is the king of negativity in politics, Donald Trump. So you see how all of this correlates. And again, it really is a breath of fresh air to have somebody like Leon Edwards because there's a lot of positive examples that we can take from his situation. Sure, he's not going to make the type of McGregor money that a lot of these trash talkers are going to make, but he gets to live in peace. Sure, he's not going to have the commercial deals that these other guys have if, let's say, they decide to run their mouth in any kind of way or get into random street fights. But guess what? He lives in a certain peace that you cannot buy. But one thing that you also can't buy is you can't buy greatness. And right now, Leon Edwards has a lot of that because of the title defenses that he's now was able to accomplish. The fact that he was able to beat the pound for pound number one guy in the world at the time and now put in the position where he's at. But also coming back from the embarrassment of getting snuffed by Jorge Masvidal in his own country back in 2019, now only to become the world champion. But maybe perhaps the reason why Leon Edwards won that fight and the reason why perhaps maybe in the future Leon Edwards becomes a global media star is because of all these accumulated matters that come with having negative opponents, having these negative situations happen to him, such as getting snuffed by Jorge Masvidal, being shunned out of title opportunities after all the win streaks that he has had going on. And then also just this adversity of having an opponent bring up such an ugly side of your life, but also highlighting some of the negative aspects that you're trying to escape from. So, will Leon Edwards ever become a Conor McGregor? Probably not. But will he ever become a global media superstar? Sure, that's a possibility based on these chain of events. He's not going to get there any quicker than, let's say, a guy like Sean O'Malley, who's going to trash talk his way to the top, but also market his persona in ways that is aesthetically pleasing to an audience that is constantly chasing that dopamine high from an action movie. Yeah, he's not going to get that, but eventually you put him up with more people like this. I think eventually he's going to become a global superstar because of certain chains of events that had happened, similar to Khabib. Before all this, people thought that Khabib was one of the most boring people ever. They never would have believed that he would become a global media superstar. And he has. Now, the one doubt, nobody doubted that he was going to become a world champion. What people doubted was him becoming a global media superstar. Just like Leon Edwards, we now can't deny that he's champion. He's already defended the title, but now we just have to wait and see if he's going to defend even more titles. But in the midst of that, the question remains, will he be a superstar? And the answer is no. It'll be very difficult to do that without, once again, a chain of events that I had just mentioned, similar or something that is within those lines to make certain things happen in order to garner attention. But also, he's never going to do it in a very fast manner in a way that you see other global media superstars such as Sean O'Malley or Conor McGregor have done in a quick span of time. Which, by the way, leads us to the next segment of it all. I think, well, I might probably do a separate video on this, but this is one thing that I think is going on in the fight game right now. And I'm probably going to clip what I'm about to say leading up to this particular next video that I might do. I think that we are now coming to the end of the pay per view star era. And this is just something that dawned on me as I'm looking at the landscape of the 170 division. Colby is out. Usman is now going to be in super fights in and out of 185 to 170, not really focusing on a title opportunity in that division. Shavkat Rakhmonov is coming up. Not a lot of people know who he is. Maybe you can create a big star out of him based on the fact that a lot of people in Kazakhstan follow him. But Bilal Muhammad, not really the biggest global superstar, unless, of course, again, the chain of events that I had mentioned. I think that after this heightened era of MMA, we can potentially see an era that is similar to the 2010s when the Klitschko's were the boxing heavyweight champions of the world. It was very stagnant, stale. They got into these fights. It was one of these fights that was really lackluster because they just did the same thing over and over again, and nobody was able to stop them as a result of it, and not really creating any buzz or any type of, how do I say this, extravagant superstardom. It's just purely into, this is the boxing architecture, this is the competitive metric that we have going on in terms of rankings. You're going to fight this guy and that. Not the type of excitement that you see today with the Saudis and the influencer boxing world that has mixed into the world of professional boxing. I think that for as long as Leon Edwards, Shafkat, and Bilal Muhammad, and just to name a few in the other weight classes as well, as long as they are in these positions, make no mistake, there's going to be a drawback to the superstardom that's going to happen, just like what you see in music as well. You look at the 90s, it was all about Pac, Dre, Blackstreet. Who else was a big star back in the days? Missy Elliott, P. Diddy, Notorious B.I.G., Bone Thugs and Harmony. And the next thing you know, here we are in this very stale era of rap where you barely know any names and a lot of the songs sound the same. I think you're going to see that in fighting in a couple of years as the height of what you see right now in the attitude era of MMA. You can easily see this go down and dwindle in terms of fan excitement. And I'm going to make a video about that coming up next for the next content, because in the next coming weeks, there's not going to be any UFC. There may be a few boxing cards that we can cover, but no UFC. That's the last UFC until they fight again in January. And then that first pay-per-view that they're going to have, UFC 297 with Dricus du Plessis and Sean Strickland. And how about the street fight that they had going on? I might make some content regarding that as well. But either way, that is all that I have for today in terms of the aftermath for UFC 296 and its life lessons that we can learn from moving forward in this event. Don't forget to like and subscribe, share, tell a friend to tell a friend, and I will see you guys soon, inshallah.